So, was anybody surprised to learn that the Sangha would be meeting this evening, which is both the first day of Hanukkah and also Christmas Day? Anybody surprised by that? Okay. Now, if you've been around a while, you kind of know we do this, but our policy is to meet every week, regardless of holidays, including religious holidays. And attendance is often less on holidays, but there are always people interested in attending and teachers interested in teaching, so why wouldn't we meet? I think we have 14 here and 5 or 6 on Zoom, so about 20 people. So you may be aware that this organization, our Sangha, is tax exempt. It's a nonprofit organization. And when you apply for that, you have to answer the question, what is the nature of your organization that qualifies you to be tax exempt? One answer, people might often presume a Dharma organization, it would be religious. And that's one of the qualifying categories. But our exemption is different from that. It's educational. Some people might say, well, Buddhism is a religion, so why not be tax exempt that way? And that's an understandable piece of confusion, and it's really what I want to speak about tonight. So tonight's talk is entitled Religion and the Dharma. And there are 3 main areas I want to cover tonight. One is, I want to kind of compare and contrast the IMC Charlotte and the Insight Meditation community in general against the religion of Buddhism. The second is, I want to take a little bit of a look at the historical record, which is a mix of religious and non-religious. And then I want to address 2 specific teachings that can be challenging for a non-religious organization like ours. But I want to take a moment before I start and just tell you why this is of interest to me. So I'm guessing all of us have a story about our religious journey. And for me, I had an uneasy relationship with religion early in my life. I was raised in the Emmanuel Lutheran Church in Lincolnton, North Carolina. And at age 12 in 1966, I went through confirmation and became a church member. I still have my book that says on the front, I believe in God the Father. And my confidence, once I joined the church, didn't last very long, and it soon became a pretty unsettled relationship. I remember asking my scoutmaster, who I revered greatly, why he believed in God. And his answer was, for centuries, many people much smarter than him had believed in God, and so he was not inclined to question that. Now, that may have been his real answer, or it may have just been a kind way to say, why do you think you're so much smarter than all the rest of us? I really don't know. But in any case, I also remember kind of pressing my mother about some of the parts of Christianity that I found a little fantastical. And eventually she said, well, I will probably go to hell for saying this. But yes, sometimes I too do question those ideas. I hope she didn't go to hell for saying that. But as you can imagine, I didn't find either of those answers very satisfactory. And with all the wisdom of a 16-year-old, I informed our minister that I found Christianity not to be believable, and I wanted him to take my name off the rolls of the church, which I suppose he did. And so for the next couple of decades, I really had no interest in or tolerance for religion. And in hindsight, I can see that my aversion to religion, my intolerance, should have been a red flag that there was something that needed attention there, but I did not see that. But at age 39, I had a spiritual experience that I couldn't reconcile with my view of religion. And it put me on a path of exploration, and I landed in the Charlotte Friends meeting, a wonderful and thoughtful group of people, and I spent over a decade exploring this. I'm still a member there, but I don't attend. But what I did find is my relationship with insight meditation, which evolved during that time, met my spiritual needs. And I didn't need to attend the Quaker meeting any longer, although I missed the people there. So happily, my aversion to religion from the 20s and 30s is gone. And now, to me, it's just one more choice that each of us make based on our understanding and our experiences. And all indications are that, like most understandings, this will continue to evolve over time. So I'm under no illusion that my current understanding is the final word. But back to our topic, let me say that the relationship between religion and the Dharma is not so simple. Most people, as I said, find their understanding unfolds gradually over years and decades. And our path in insight meditation isn't the path of easy answers. If you want, there are plenty of traditions out there that will happily tell you what to believe and not particularly encourage your questioning that. Not all religions, some religions welcome questioning, but there are many that will just tell you what to believe, and that's an easy path, seems to me. But the hard work that we are required to do in this insight meditation tradition provides us with a confidence that can prove to be unshakable. A research project conducted by the Pew Research Center, this was in 2010, found that there are about 500 million Buddhists in the population, which was 6.9 billion people. And the great majority of those people identify as members of the Buddhist religion. But not all do, and IMC Charlotte is a part of that minority that follows the teachings of the Buddha but are not a part of the religion. So to understand this, we really have to recognize that the Buddha did not set out to found a religion. That was not his intention. What he did intend was to share what he had learned about how the mind works and how we can live in a way that creates less suffering for ourselves and others. And after his death, some of his very accomplished and devoted followers created a religion around his teachings. But the religious overlay is optional, and our understanding is these teachings work equally well for people of any religion or of no religion. And that's the reason we're an educational nonprofit. So that's a little bit about that topic. Now, what's the difference? How can we identify the difference? First and foremost, religions are belief systems. They require the practitioner to take some elements of the religion on faith. In contrast, the Dharma doesn't require anything be accepted on faith. The teachings that comprise the Dharma are independently verifiable by the practitioner in her own experience. And on numerous occasions, Buddhists are discouraged in embracing any teachings that one has not verified for oneself. Some of you may be familiar with the Kalama Sutta. It's a story of Buddha passing through a village and the people of that village posing a question to him. So they've been subject to this steady stream of wandering teachers, and each teacher expounded on the virtues of their own teachings and denigrated those of all the other teachers. And the question that they posed to the Buddha is, which of these venerable Brahmins and contemplatives are speaking the truth and which are lying? So here's the Buddha's response. Don't go by reports, by legends, by traditions, by scripture, by logical conjecture, by inference, by analogies, by agreement through pondering views, by probability, or by the thought, this contemplative is our teacher. When you know for yourselves that these qualities are skillful, these qualities are blameless, these qualities are praised by the wise, these qualities, when adopted and carried out, lead to welfare and to happiness, then you should enter and remain in them. Now, when we first hear that, it can sound like it gives us free rein to believe whatever we choose. And so I want to share one more quote here with you. This is a commentary by it's introduction. So Thanissaro Bhikkhu translated what you just heard. And this is his commentary before the translation. Although this discourse is often cited as the Buddha's carte blanche for following one's own sense of right and wrong, it actually says something much more rigorous than that. Traditions are not to be followed simply because they're traditions. Reports, such as historical accounts or news, are not to be followed simply because the source seems reliable. One's own preferences are not to be followed simply because they seem logical or resonate with one's feelings. Instead, any view or belief must be tested by the results it yields when put into practice, and to guard against the possibility of any bias or limitations in one's understanding, they must be further checked against the experience of people who are wise. So I just want to repeat one line from that commentary. Any view or belief must be tested by the results it yields when put into practice. And that's what we're doing here. We are testing our views and our beliefs by the results they yield when we put them into practice. So our task of discernment is more complicated than it first appears. Still, the ultimate conclusion to any usefulness, its validity, is up to each of us individually. And this is a far cry from embracing a teaching based solely on faith, a far cry from embracing a belief system. One thing you'll notice in parsing out religious versus secular Buddhist is terminology. Here, you'll hear the teachings referred to as suttas, while religious Buddhists will often refer to them as scriptures. We reference the Buddha's followers, while religious Buddhists will often refer to disciples. We'll refer to being on this path to awakening, and with religious Buddhists, you'll often hear them refer to living the holy life. And even with the Buddha himself, he's often referred to by religious Buddhists as the Blessed One or the Lord Buddha. Now, I'm not saying we're right and they're wrong. All I'm doing is just pointing out some ways you can get a feel for, if you're reading or if you're listening to a talk, where somebody's coming from. So as I said earlier, understanding this relationship between religion and the Dharma is not always straightforward. When you study the suttas, you will find references to the term saddha. That's a Pali word that's usually translated into English as faith. As a matter of fact, saddha is the first of the 5 powers that are recommended for progress on the path. So what gives? Is there a place for faith in the Dharma or not? Another translation of saddha is verified confidence. And this translation can begin to open up a bit more of a nuanced understanding. Over the years, I've found the Dharma has proven to be correct in so many ways because I have confidence through my own past verification. I'm inclined to give the Dharma the benefit of the doubt. I'm willing to try it on for size when I encounter a new teaching to give it some level of credibility before I can fully verify it. But still, there are elements of the Dharma that so far I have been unable to verify for myself. And I simply hold these as unknowns. I don't discard them, and I don't accept them on faith. They're questions to which the answers are not yet clear. Sometimes those who are new to insight meditation will ask about rituals. While we have far fewer rituals than most religions, since our practice is not religious, why would we have any rituals? For example, most of us bow at the end of a meditation period. Many of us have representations of the Buddha in our homes, and the practice of chanting can feel very religious. So we need to understand that not all rituals are religious rituals. When I bow at the end of a meditation period, it is a gesture of gratitude for my good fortune at having access to this body of teachings. I appreciate a statue of the Buddha because I have great respect for what he accomplished and what he then passed on to others, including me. Chanting is not a big part of my practice, but when I do chant, I find it inspiring, particularly when it's done with others. So all of these are valued non-religious rituals in my practice. Religious Buddhists might go through exactly the same motions, but they might have a different relationship to what they're doing. This is just one example. There's a sect of Buddhism called Nichiren, and their understanding is that if one chants the name of the Lotus Sutra, not the whole sutra, but just the name of the sutra, that they can tap into enlightenment. So maybe that's true. I don't know. I'm not saying it's not true, but it's a different understanding. But it's a way that religious rituals can be very important to people. Somebody can perform the same motion and have it can have a very different meaning for them. And for non-religious practitioners, the rituals are non-religious rituals. I think that's useful to keep in mind because when I first started practicing, I thought that was confusing. It seemed religious to me. So earlier, I stated it can be challenging to understand this relationship, and I want to explore a few reasons, all of which relate to the fact that the historical record of the Buddha's teachings, how can I say this? It's imperfect. So first, he taught about 2,600 years ago. And at that time, reading and writing were not something people did. His teachings were preserved via oral tradition for several hundred years before they were finally committed to writing. And preserving this vast collection known as the Pali Canon by passing it on orally from one generation to the next is an imperfect method. This explains some of the features of the teachings. You may have noticed the extensive use of numbered lists. For example, the Four Noble Truths, the Noble Eightfold Path, the Five Hindrances. This was done as a memory aid. If I know there are 7 factors of awakening and I end up with 6 or 8, it'll be obvious that I've made a mistake in my list. And it was also common for the suttas to be chanted. And that, again, helped preserve accuracy. If there was a group of a dozen practitioners chanting a sutta, and one person got a line wrong, the rest of the group's correct memory would highlight that error. So a second challenge in understanding the suttas is they've been preserved by nuns and monks who are almost exclusively religious Buddhists. After 2,600 years of preserving the vast collection, it's almost unthinkable that a religious overlay hasn't crept into this record. That said, I do want to be clear about something that's really important. Those of us who are practicing today owe a huge debt of gratitude to the nuns and monks who preserved the canon over the past 26 centuries. Many of them devoted their entire lives to this work, and without them, those of us in the room, those of us on Zoom, wouldn't have about what the Buddha taught. So when we study the suttas, we just need to recognize that there are almost certainly some religious influences that have found their way into the record. Now, a third challenge is Pali, the original language spoken during the time of the Buddha, is no longer a spoken language. Honest academics devote themselves to providing accurate translations, but there are invariably differences. Some of the earliest translations into English took place in the 1800s during the Victorian era, and not surprisingly, the cultural and the moral norms of that time are reflected in the words of the translators. Translations that are different from each other can be frustrating, but they can also be really useful. If a particular translation that you're working with, that I'm working with, seems obscure or unintelligible, which happens, reading a different translation can often begin to shed more light on it. So a fourth and final reason I'm going to name is that we don't really know why the Buddha taught the way he did. The Pali Canon, as it's been handed down to us today, has many religious references. What does that mean? The Buddha was known to have been really accomplished at presenting his teachings in a way that could reach different people and address their different needs at the same time. He was teaching when there was much competition among religions, primarily the Vedic and the Hindu religions. Did he use religious language just as a way for his message to be understood, to frame it in a way that his listeners could grasp it? We don't know. What we do know is that he often used similes that were familiar to his listeners. For example, tending one's animals in the field, or crossing a river on a raft, or handling a hot coal. And it seems reasonable that he might have framed his teachings in words that his religious listeners could relate to. There are other complications in understanding a 2,600-year-old body of teachings in the culture, in the context of our culture, but you get the idea. When we study the suttas, our understanding must necessarily be nuanced. Even still, when used with the proper awareness, the record of the Buddha's teachings is a truly amazing resource, and it is fully sufficient. I'm going to stop. I wanted to address two specific teachings that are challenging Buddhists, but I'm out of time. Maybe I can find the time to put that into another talk. So anyway, I think the whole issue of religion and the Dharma can be confusing, and I don't think any of us are going to gain instant clarity about it. But I hope that what I've covered tonight will be some use to you as you investigate this on your own and try to make it be in relationship to whatever religious understandings you have. So I hope this is useful.